All right, so a very fire-dominated Team YCS Las Vegas just happened, and we have to talk about it.
Essentially every single monster on the field, and we're going to special summon out the U-Bell. Anyone can play U-Bell plus Super Poly. Literally have to go into the battle phase. You cannot skip your battle phase.
Players just explaining that. You don't see U-Bell every day here, but it looks like we're going to link off our low.
Well, if it's going to be Lincoln, that's going to be an attack position.
Oh no, it might be in the wrong zone here. Relinquish Anima taking the field and possibly absorbing that monster.
This was in slot 5 side.
Oh.
I did summon in slot 5, and then you read it.
It was, but can I back?
Oh no, is there a dispute on the positioning of that card? Gotta be careful when you read your opponent's cards. You gotta return it back to the same position.
Now, there was some weird voiceless voice stuff, which I don't want to get into too much. If you have your own opinions, of course, leave them in the comments, but I just think it's extremely convenient to mistake a zone, summon an anima, but like I said, let's not get into that too much. Feel free to comment in the comments down below though. Before we get started though, make sure to go check out Sleeve Chief because they just restocked a bunch of items and they dropped a very beautiful collection, and you can get all of that for 5% off with my code SHADOW. So if you're looking for some accessories, make sure to check them out. Now let's go ahead and get started. Of course, we have to address the elephant in the room, which is, like I said in the intro, a lot of fire decks. Just a whole lot of them. And of course, we have to look at some pie charts and some representation. Look, share your thoughts in the comments. I would really love to know what you think about this fire meta that we're in right now. And as you can tell by the pie chart, there's just so much Fire King Snake Eye and Pure Snake Eye as well. And even though this is still spread out between two different decks, if we really think about it, this is more than 70% representation of just decks featuring Snake Eye cards. So, you know, every person of course has their own opinion, but to me personally, this was a very, very enjoyable stream to watch. We actually got to witness a lot of good gameplay from some top players in the game right now. And also, a 3v3 setting is always going to be a little different, but I still feel like, you know, this was just a really nice event to witness because everything fire when it comes to mirror matches is extremely interactive actually. So, you know, even though there's a lot of fire decks over here, for the most part, I think it's looking very similar to how events are looking like right now, even if they're not 3v3. So fire is definitely going to dominate. And speaking of fire decks being dominant, the entire event ended up being won by obviously a fire deck, but we witnessed Snake Eyes Pure versus Fire King Snake Eyes in the finals, and we'll get into some of the differences between both decks later in the video in the breakdown. But then the entire YCS ended up being won by Team the Jawari Brothers. And what I also wanted to point out from this finals is a card that stood out to me and probably most of you as well, which was Lullaby of Obedience. So this is a really, really good choice, specifically for the main deck as well in this 3v3 setting where you expect a lot of mirror matches, and it definitely was a bit of a surprise, but a really, really cool card nonetheless, which obviously you have on the screen and you're able to read it. It has a really, really cool effect, and it definitely was, I guess, one of the highlights of this finals. But we did see other decks on stream as well, so let's talk about those, because that was also enjoyable to watch, to, you know, switch things up a bit from everything fire. So we saw this Pia, which I always mention, you know, in my videos, just being a really nice deck with a strong engine that just seems like it can go up against all of the fire decks. There was also Kashtira. You know, Kashtira is still around. Shifter is way too powerful of a card, and it just can exist in this meta. And it goes the same for Flunder. You know, it's just very solid at what it does, and we did see it, as well as Purdley, and there was also Voiceless Voice. Now, Voiceless is kind of weird because sometimes it just feels like it loses to a lot. Actually, it does not seem amazing, but then in other instances, it just seems like it has a good matchup with some of the top decks. So yeah, you know, if you like this deck and if you don't want to play fire, I think Voiceless Voice is actually a really interesting, you know, and good choice. And let's move on to some other decks. There's Purley, which I just feel like it's not as strong as the top decks, and I think that's kind of apparent, but people still like it, and it is fairly solid, so I completely understand that they still play it. There's also Sinful Spoils Rescue Ace, which, you know, very near and dear to my heart. Also regular branded Labyrinth and Manadium. So all of the decks that did perform before Fire started to dominate everything still are here, because if you're really good at what you do, if you really master your own deck, I think you're going to be able to go very far, even though the meta shifted essentially. So yeah, this is a little pie chart I wanted us to take a look at, but this is also a really interesting representation. If we compare, actually, let me pull up some better pictures. If we compare after round 7, I believe, and then also after round 8. So after round 7, Fire King Snake Eye was much more represented. And then moving on to the next round, you can see the significant drop. However, pure Snake Eyes became much, you know, bigger in representation pretty much. So I think it goes to show that pure Snake Eyes is actually a deck to look out for, and a lot of times players will gravitate towards Fire King Snake Eyes because it's a little more explosive. It basically has this whole another engine which just helps you grind, helps you play through many things, because Kirin is just a really, really good card. However, Snake Eye pure is amazing at playing through hand traps. Being able to access all of these synchro monsters is just really, really valuable in my opinion. So yeah, I figured this was interesting to showcase. And let's talk about some other decks that are actually here. So we can see Marinces, which is, you know, very interesting. Also Raid Raptor Kashtira, kind of a version of Kashtira actually. Snake Eye Kashtira as well. So people are still innovating with this deck, which is just nice to see. Raid Raptor, which this deck, like, I don't know. I think we have to respect Raid Raptor. You know, just take a couple minutes, go through some combos, try to figure out what it does, because it's going to catch you off guard and you really don't want that. We did talk about Manadium, Labyrinth, Vanquish Soul. That's a little interesting to me because this deck just wasn't that amazing in last format. It managed to squeeze like a top here and there, but it just seemed like it's not going to be able to perform as well moving forward. And I do think this has to do with the fact that obviously we're in a 3v3 setting, so a lot of decks like Marinces, Vanquish Soul and stuff, and not to knock the players, but a lot of those decks probably can go far because, you know, their teammates probably played stronger decks, if we're being completely honest. So that's something to think about. But we also have two versions of Rescue Ace, which is like Snake Eye and Sinful Spoil. So I assume the Snake Eye version has an actual bigger package, which in my opinion is a really good way to build Rescue Ace, and I'm not biased at all. And as for some of the cards that actually saw play as well, I did want to talk about this because that's like my favorite thing, you know, seeing the text right when it happens. You see someone activate a card like Typhoon or Twister or something like that, and it's just really cool to see. So yeah, it was also covered on the Konami blog, which props to them for actually doing this. This is where I took some of the info from. They basically wrote an actual article about the cards that saw most play, which, you know, I think that's, you know, good, really good on their part. So Twister and Typhoon, I did want to mention those. Those were like my two favorite techs probably from the weekend. Just Typhoon is such a smart tech right now because you're always going to be able to activate it from your hand. Your opponent, if they're on fire, anything, they're going to have either field spell up and then stuff in the spell and trap card zone, whether that's Populars, Flamebird Dragon, anything that Flamebird places. And also you're able to pop this when Flamebird actually wants to summon it. So I love this, and Twin Twister, just being able to deal with 2 back row and not losing to anti-spell is so important because a lot of players are on anti-spell right now. So immediately Lightning Storm and Harpies are going to become much, much worse. And then some other techs, they're fairly basic. A lot of players were on Nibiru main deck, which, you know, I understand actually, like, it is really impactful. You do have to know when to drop it. And also, what makes Snake Eyes really good is the fact that they can play around it fairly well. So that's important to think about. And then there's also Ash and Imperm, just the MVP cards right now. Some players started to say at the beginning of the format that Ash is going to fall off, which it might. Like, I understand that because of Hita, but it's just way too good when it resolves on like, I don't know, oak, send away for cost, or like ash or original or something like that. Like sometimes you just have to have ash, even though they might climb into princess with the help of your own ash. There's also talents, which is just such an amazing card. Obviously in the mirror match, even more useful for the effect to take, and just being able to pretty much utilize cards like Appaloosa and stuff like that for your own purposes. That's amazing. Hand rip, draw also, which we did see a couple of legal stuff with that as well. There was actually quite a lot of stuff like that on stream, which I just hope that, I don't know, in the future, I guess it gets noticed a little sooner, so stuff doesn't need to be awkwardly repaired back to the other game state. Like, but I also understand that judges are under a lot of pressure, you know, on stream, obviously. So let's not get into that too much, but yes. And then there's also Bestios. Players started to play it because of Voiceless Voice, which I understand, you know, stuff like Bell Bestios is nice against that deck. And then there's also Crossout, which I just have beef with this card. Overall, it's just Crossout is way too amazing right now, and I think you do have to play it, especially if you're playing a fire deck. So let's actually round this video off with a little shout out of the, hold on, I wrote it down. I wrote down what it's called. Ultimate Time Wizard Team Tournament, which is basically the team tournament where one player plays GOAT, one player plays Edison, and the other one plays Current. And I just love this idea. I would love to participate in something like that. And yeah, I just think it's amazing. I think it's an incentive for someone that just maybe is not into Current too much to still play in a competitive setting, and I just completely love this, and I definitely wanted to talk about it. So that's amazing. It could be a thing at like every event, I think, and people would probably be excited. So that's nice. And yeah, you know, like I said at the beginning of the video, like it might not be a format for everybody, but it does feel very enjoyable to me personally. I love the interaction. I love the decks are still able to perform, especially if they're good against the top decks. And yeah, I guess share your thoughts in the comments down below as well. Let me know if you watched the event or if you were maybe there and what deck you're playing in this format. And of course, like the video if you did like it, and I'll catch you in the next one.